This is Archaeodeath, an exploration in the archaeology of death and memory, past and present, with Professor Howard Williams.
Archaeodeathlings, welcome to another Archaeodeath interview. And I'm especially excited to be talking to a guest all the way from Sweden. It's Stefan. Stefan, would you please introduce yourself formally and properly for our viewers and listeners? And I'm looking forward to this conversation so much. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. Formally and properly. I'm an historian. I'm a professor of history at Malmö University in Sweden, and down south in Sweden, very close to Copenhagen and Denmark. And I'm really a modern historian. So I basically delve into how history are being used today in different aspects. But as a modern historian, I've been more and more interested in Iron Age, early Middle Ages, and so on, and how this time periods influence us today. And on the borderlands between sort of the fantastic part of history and history and archaeology. Something like that.
I mean, it's such an intriguing topic, and I've encountered you as my generous and benevolent editor of this wonderful book that you co-edited with Sarah Ellis Nielsen. Here we are. This is it, Viking Heritage and History in Europe, Practices and Recreations. So this came out last year. Tell us a bit about that. How did that all start off?
Oh, it all started a couple of years ago. Actually, myself and a colleague of mine, another professor of history at my department, Thomas Marve, we were invited to York and the Yorick Viking Festival. We had some interest in Vikings and how the Viking Age was used today, so we sort of made a stop there and saw the festival, and we had some contacts with the Yorick Viking Center and so on, and they actually came across another group of researchers there, and they graciously invited us to do a book. And that's how it all started. And a couple of sometimes later, Thomas dropped out and Sarah came on board, and we started working with the book. So the basic idea was to see what sort of remnants of Viking heritage could be seen in basically Europe today, because the book was supposed to be in a book series focusing on cultural heritage in Europe. And it's really fun to do. And we sort of reached out to our networks and contacts and so on, including you, Howard, to sort of get a grip on the Viking Age today, because we realized that the Viking Age was really, really in focus and very popular, and phenomena that just went all over the world. Really, we realized that the Viking Age wasn't a European heritage. It had transformed into sort of a global phenomena, and that was very intriguing. So but we are really happy with the book, and it crosses many borders when it comes to different types of academics from different disciplines and so on. We have archaeologists, we have historians, historians of religion, more anthropologists and so on. So that was really fun to have this sort of many varied disciplinary project when it came to the book.
I mean, I really loved it, and it was an honor to be able to sort of write some reflections on it, and you've got sort of going from back to front, I think might be better, because you've got a section on how the Viking Age is represented in museums and how political extremists use runes and stories of the Vikings in modern nationhood. Before that, you've got sort of chapters on popular culture, comics, alcohol consumption, gaming, and interpretations in popular culture. And the first section is more about the sort of the tourism and about Viking heritage spaces and Viking hiking, which I love that title, and historical pageants. And where I wanted to get to last, and that's why I did it that way around, to your chapter on Viking reenactment, which I thought was really insightful, because, you know, I've come across reenactors every now and again, and I've talked to friends who are reenactors, but I've always kept a distance, and perhaps I'm ashamed of that in a sense, because it's taken me a long time to realize just how informed, engaged, and, you know, how much potential there is in living history reenactment, in telling stories about the Vikings. But I don't know, how did you get into that particular reenactment field? That's fascinating.
Yeah, and a bit. I didn't really see it coming. But the thing is that I'm really interested in why people are so fascinated with history. Yes. And the past. I mean, there's a huge interest from the general public towards both archaeology, history, past in general, and we have all these movies, all these comics and TV series and so on, computer games using history. So there's a huge interest in the past, and of course that for me too was that's why I'm a professor of history today. I mean, I had this sort of desire for the past since I was a child. And I think talking to people in our fields, I think that's very common, that you get this love for the past in some way, and then you develop it into a profession. That's the story for me, at least. So what I really are interested is why are the past so intoxicating, so desirable for us in the present, and I'm also interested in the history of that. I mean, this is not something new. Yeah. You have the medieval revival in the 19th century and so on. So all this I'm very interested in. And I started thinking, how can I, as a researcher, develop something that I could study? And I needed sort of a group that was very into the past and very engaged with the past, that was sort of a definite group. So I did some pilot studies a couple of years ago, like 10 years ago, in many different aspects of the use of the past, like role playing or HEMA and that kind of thing. And then I came across the thing we're going to talk about later today, the Grendel's Horde project. That was basically one of the pilot studies I did, an interview with a very informed expert swordsmith and the project that he was part of developing. And I sort of focused in on reenactment as a thing to study. So I'm not a reenactor myself, and I've never done that. I'm a tabletop role-playing fanatic and nerd, but not in that dressing up thing and so on. So it was all very new to me. But I soon realized, when I started to look into reenactment and meeting reenactors and talking with them, that the same experience you have, that they are really good at what they do. And some of them are really expert in different aspects of the past. When it comes to history, when it comes to archaeology, they're very well read on archaeological reports and so on. So they're really good. And I think that we as academics tend to lose sight of that. We don't really recognize that. And for me, as a social historian, in the end, it's really interesting to see and to focus in on that, and so give them some credit. Really, I see this I see reenactment as a sort of grassroots public history projects. And I think it's worth both recognizing them and also studying them and discussing with them what they are doing, not in an uncritical way, of course, but with respect.
I think that's really cool because, I mean, I must admit, when I first started talking to reenactors about their interests, what they wanted to know from me defined what I thought they knew. So what I mean by that is over the years, when reenactors have approached me, they tend to want to see me as a mine of information about the objects. In other words, and while I have some of that knowledge, I realize they know more than me already, that they used the reports as a quarry for designs, for inspiration, for what is accurate, what is not. But then I realized that not all of them, but some of them are engaging at those other levels as well. They care about the broader historical changes. They care about the debates. It's just that they were only asking me about the very sort of descriptive, practical, detailed stuff. But that's because I hadn't spent time talking to enough of them. And so yes, that chimes with me very much. The potential here to show respect, critique them, but in a respectful way, recognizing their contribution. Yes.
Yeah.
So do you that's an ongoing project. I want to get on to talk about Grendel Scout, but a bit more, but we'll come to that in a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you, you've got another edited book coming out, or another couple of books or projects, I can't remember. This is your reenactment work is ongoing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And we have different tracks now we're working on. Of course, the thing that you were invited to a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Vikingisms, I mean, the use of the Vikings and the Viking Age in a sort of public history way. That's what I'm developing right now. I want to I mean, now I've done this chapter on Viking reenactment, it seems like it's a good idea to delve deeper. So I have a project idea that I'm starting to do some pilot studies in now, where I like to both see the academic, institutional, museum perspective of reenactment, because a lot of museums today are using reenactment in their mediation of the past. Both at historical sites, archaeological site, museums, and so on, they are using reenactment and reenactment groups. And I would really like to know more about how the museums are working here and how they are thinking about this and how they sort of negotiate their responsibilities towards the past and so on, with meeting the public and meeting reenactors. And then I want to do the same thing with reenactors. I have this grassroots perspective of Viking reenactment, and I want to know more about that and how they are thinking about what they are doing, and from many different ways. And I'm sort of thinking that something happens when the sort of institutional side of reenactment meets the grassroots reenactment. Something happens there, and that sort of interesting meeting point is something that I want to know more about. So that's really what I'm going to do this year and onwards. I have some pilot studies coming up. I will go, for example, to Norway, to Lofoten, and see their work there at the museum, the Lofoten Viking Museum there.
Oh, yes,
and later in August, I will go to Iceland and go to a very small museum on the west coast of Iceland called Erikstadir. That's a rebuilt Viking hall, very small hall, and see how they are doing reenactment and working with reenactors and working with the local community too, because I think this is something sort of I mean, there's a lot of people doing reenactment, and I was surprised to know that there was a sort of huge, sort of broad movement almost in modern day society when it comes to reenactment. And a lot of this also engaged at the local communities too. And a lot of museums work with local communities and local reenactors and so on. So that's also something that I find very interesting. This sort of, community engagement with the past.
Yes,
that's where I'm starting right now. So it's an upcoming project, and let's see where it goes, really.
Well, I'm glad I asked that now, because that future work helps us understand this book that you've just produced, which I'm really excited. I've been flipping through it, but my Swedish language skills are not what they should be, I'm afraid. But I really enjoyed looking at this, and it was really great to meet you at that workshop and to see all the ideas coming together for where things are going next. But this is really cool, and the front cover's behind you, but it's also here, and this is just, I haven't seen anything like this before, so I was just like, oh wow. And it's not, I think we should start off maybe by cautioning, this is not about necessarily the Vikings per se. This is more about the long story of early medieval / late Iron Age Scandinavia / Northern Europe, and how it inspires people. So yes, tell us about Grendel's scat. That's really cool.
Yeah, Grendel's scat, or in English, Grendel's Horde, I should say. Yeah, sorry, it's in Swedish.
No, don't apologize. It's just,
but it's I have a lot of interest from outside Sweden towards the book, so I really should do something in English, but maybe write an article or something about it. But yeah, the thing is that I was doing these pilot studies, doing interviews with many different persons working with the past, using the past, reenacting the past, and I came across a person that I met before and found very interesting, and he's a Swedish swordsmith. He makes swords, and he's quite famous. He works all over the world. I know that he was involved in making swords for some of the Game of Thrones stuff and so on. So he was engaged there and so on. And his name is Peter Jansson, and he's Swedish like me, and has his smithy and so on up in Uppsala in the middle part of Sweden. And I went there and I did an interview with him about swordsmithing and sort of the artisan engagement with the past. And he told me about the project that he had been involved with a couple of years earlier, and they called the project the Grendel's Horde project. And so it was, he's part of a sort of international group of artisans, mostly swordsmiths, and they work with blades and so on, but they have a broader range than that, really. And they call themselves the Arctic Fire Group. And they had a workshop in Canada, actually. And they had an idea that we can use our expertise and sort of play with it. And the idea here was that they should take a part of the Old English poem Beowulf. There's a small sort of a line in the poem. It's a very long poem, but it's one line in the poem, when the hero Beowulf has killed Grendel, and he has met and killed Grendel's mother. He's down there in the sort of underworld, this watery underworld, and you have this hoard where these two trolls has collected their sort of valuables. And the idea here, the line in the poem says something like, "There's a lot of treasure here," basically. And they had this idea that if we take this line in this poem and we sort of play with it and think that, okay, this is fiction, this is a poem from the early Middle Ages, but what if it's true? Like the finding of Troy, for example. Like if someone actually finds a treasure hoard from the migration era or early Middle Ages, and this hoard is basically Grendel's hoard. What if it was really found? And so they made this up. They made a whole story about this. Like a young farmer walking in Denmark in the mid-19th century, and it had been a storm, and he found a cave, and he went into the cave and he found these treasures. It was really dangerous for him, but he took some treasures with him up to the daylight, and he didn't dare to go down again. But he had like 5 or 6 things that he took from this treasure hoard. And then they continued the story that this young man took this treasure hoard to a local priest. He was really, really excited about these archaeological findings and so on. And he started to draw these items up, and he started to selling these items all over the world. So in this story, you have the findings here from the Grendel's hoard all across the world, really. Some came to Germany, some came to United States, and so on. Collectors are gathering these things up. So they have this story about this hoard being found in the mid-19th century, and they have the storyline going up until today. And they basically said that one of the members of this group was called to a meeting to an old woman in New York, and she showed them a dagger, an archaeological artifact in the form of a dagger. And they got really excited, and then they started backtracking and found out this history. So they made this up. And then they said, okay, let's do these things like they really, really had existed, like they were archaeological findings, and let's make this sort of fantastic story come to life. So the Grendel Hoard project was about making these artifacts, this made-up artifact, as they would have been real archaeological findings from the migration era, let's say. And then they made them, and they made fantastic things. And they continued with the story and so on, and so. And the basic idea when I talked to Peter Johnson was, okay, let's make this fantastic things, and let's make this story, but let's also in this development try to say something about history, about archaeology, and let's say something about the borderlines between history and fiction.
Yes.
So they really, in the sort of project, made this into a sort of question about what can we really know about the past.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's basically the idea of the Grendel Hoard project.
So the entire fictional, but everything produced, inspired by not an authentic aura, shall we say? I mean, that image behind you is not only did they reproduce, they created a pressblech sort of design that is like some of the helmet pieces from the Vendel or Merovingian period, but it's completely fabulous. But even the way it's drawn is like an archaeological drawing. So they did the full process of making it and then treating it as if it was real archaeology and the stories around it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. They made fantastic things. And they sort of made the new stuff, and then they sort of made it look like archaeological findings. So this pressblech, for example, they made the pressblech, and then they sort of degraded it so it would look like an archaeological find. And in their storyline, they say that some reenactors went to Uppsala, to the museum there, the university museum, and in one of the boxes they found this pressblech. So they also made a story about themselves and how they are sort of go treasure hunting, finding these things, and sort of slowly building the story of the Grendel Hoard. And they also try to, in the sort of storyline, trying to say something about modern history, about the connection between archaeology and the darker sides of using the past, like the Nazi era and so on.
Oh, good, right.
So they build that into the story, so they really entangle the story with sort of questions about authenticity, about history, archaeology, and sort of dark ideology, Nazism, and so on, and sort of build this storyline. So they mix in this like dark and dissonant uses of the past in their project. And some of them had really a hard time to do this because all of them are artisans. Many of them works towards museum stone replicas and so on of archaeological finds, and they have like they were a bit unsure of how this would be received, and they were really keen on, okay, we are making fake history here, and how can this really come back and haunt us later on, that we are, if people start to see these things and take them seriously and think that they are true, what will happen then? And actually Peter told me that a lot of the things they are doing are going around on reenactment sites and social media and so on, and being discussed. So it has come true in some way. But
fantastic.
to tackle that, they mixed into the storyline a sort of fantasy thread. So just to make a point that this is not real.
Yeah.
So they mixed in the idea of this is things made by trolls. They basically said we see Grendel and Grendel's mother like they are trolls. And the things they are collecting in their treasure hoard is something that trolls would be keen on keeping. And they basically saw them as, I mean, in the Beowulf poem, it says that Grendel's mothers are descendants of Cain. They are outcasts. They were humans before, but they have become outcasts in the eyes of God. And as outsiders looking into humanity and seeing the shining human halls and the kings and the treasures, they are sort of pining for that, and they are pining for their humanity. And in this project, they ask, like, what would Grendel's mother really want to collect to remind them of their past humanity? So there's a lot of that interesting things too. But they basically troll things also. They are in this treasure hoard, there are things produced by trolls. So this dagger they say they have found in New York is a troll dagger.
So it's like based on a Bronze Age aesthetic of a Bronze Age dagger. So an ancient heirloom that's been... go on, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. But they're mixing the sort of thread of the trolls into the storyline, just to remind people that this isn't true. So we have this mix of fantasy really into the whole mix, and the idea of troll things from then until now, that's really mixing things up and really ask these questions about the borderlines between what I in the book call the sort of mythopoetic past of Beowulf. You can see it as a mythopoetic storyline going from then until now, that are being used in many different ways nowadays in like television and movies and computer games and comics and so on. So I mean the story of Beowulf are very much alive today.
And just again, I know, but I still, despite it being very clear, I just want to reiterate for audiences. So the artifact behind that's been drawn is not real. There's no representation of Grendel or Grendel's mother, but this is, if I understand it correctly, this is the moment where Beowulf's own blade has failed him, but he takes this ancient sword from the Horde, stabs Grendel's mother. She's wielding a dagger. You've got Asher's head that she took from the hall, just out of shot. You've got one of the serpents in the mere, maybe at the other corner, and you've got the arm of Grendel. So you've got a kind of like an attempt to put in the style of the early Middle Ages or the late Iron Age, a recreation of this story. And you know, it's for me, I've had my own imaginings of what Grendel's mother looked like. This looks closer than almost anything that I've seen in TV or comic books to my imaginings, my personal imaginings, because it's in the style of how people were doing art in parts of Scandinavia in the centuries after the collapse of the Roman Empire. And it's a different way of engaging, isn't it? I think that's absolutely amazing. And it's playing with these ideas of what do we know, and what stories we can tell, and how material culture would have been circulating in these societies and being used as prompts to tell the stories. And it's sort of, I think it speaks in that way as well.
Yeah, they're aesthetically very, very good at what they're doing.
Yeah.
Their stuff is really, really beautiful made, and very, very, I mean, they are experts in their fields. They are expert in recreating historical and archaeological replicas, and they take this expertise and they do something groundbreakingly new, I would say. And that's the key for me, because this shows me, as a professor of history, that people outside academia really can use their expertise to say something very profound about the past.
Yes.
And how we are using the past, and they show me at least that they buy this, what I call a public history project then, of making the Grendel's Hoard and asking all these really difficult questions about what history is, what archaeology is, what the past is, and the borders between truth and fiction and so on. They really say something about that, and how the history has been used in many different ways. Some of them very dark, and some of them really made into beautiful artifacts and so on. So I found this project fantastically interesting.
One thing I don't understand, Stefan, is what did they do? Was this very much a niche project for themselves and their own social media accounts, or did they display this at any museum, or how did they, before you wrote your book reflecting on it, how did they share this?
They had social media platform while they did the project, and they had sort of broadcasting about different aspects of the project. And if you search on YouTube, you can find Peter Johnson talking about the project, and you can hear him tell the whole story about the Grendel Horde and the trolls and so on. So it's very much worth your time if you look that up and see Peter talk about it. So they had some outlets of it on social media, and I know when I talked to Peter, he had been very keen on, what if we could make an exhibition at the archaeological museums depicting these pieces. But I think some of the members in the group, that's the sort of feeling I got, didn't really want that, because these are not really real objects. These are fake objects, and
they didn't want it taken too seriously. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Absolutely. The sort of play here, the sort of idea of playful engagement with the past and making these things, at some point it became too much reality and too much of like, okay, what if people are, if that come back and hurt us later on, that we are doing this sort of fake history. But I would love to see this at the museum. The whole storyline, the objects and so on, it would be fantastic.
I'd go further. I'd love to see the academic conference reflecting on these objects. I'd like to see the TV documentary, and I'd like to see further excavations to find out more about the site, and actually do excavations at a fictional site. But I know that risks people thinking we're trying to mislead or deceive. And we put so much emphasis on that there's so many forgeries out there, but this would be in a creative and honestly creative way. But you know, I think this is fantastic.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more about seeing this really done into many different things. And and I'm so pleased that I found this story, and I got to talk to Peter and sort of basically heard him tell the story, and I just realized this is it. This is what I've been looking for. So I did all these other interviews, and I still have them, but this was so fantastic, and I got really much out of it by analyzing it and thinking about reenactment, and really for me, this says that history is not something that's only historians or academics or archaeologists do. History is something that's out there, and people are using history in very interesting ways. So sort of my sort of baseline for the research I'm doing now is a catch line that says that history is not only consumed, but also produced and mediated by grassroots public historians.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is evidence of, because there are, I mean, I was just taken to this very literal, and if I dare say it, and I know that Americans will get angry at me for this, both academic Americans and popular culture Americans, very American divide between fact and fiction, very positivist, that there is, we are, and I understand why that's coming about, because they are facing so much pseudo archaeology, pseudo history,
Yeah.
from paranormal narratives about sites to ancient aliens. And I understand why American archaeology has gone down this hard line. No,
Mm.
there's a past, and then there's all this nonsense. But I think from a Scandinavian perspective, talking to you, it's like a breath of fresh air for me, because it
Mm.
shows the potential here for so many more creative engagements for children, for adult groups. And a few years ago, I attended as the academic a performance of Beowulf by a living history group in
Yeah.
a modern barrow, in a modern columbarium built in the
Mm.
style of a Neolithic tomb,
Mm.
as a modern business, as a funerary site.
Mm.
So surrounded by the real dead during the
Mm.
pandemic, we actually participated in a performance of Beowulf, a much
Mm.
abridged one, of course, and
Mm.
but with reenactors in 6th, 7th century costume,
Yeah.
but in a setting that is unlike anything else. And of course, that
Mm.
that tomb itself is not pretending to be Neolithic. It's a
Mm.
modern disposal facility for the cremated dead in the modern landscape. It's a serious, profound, you know, quasi-sacred space as a it's not for any particular religious group, it's non-denominational, but it became a really powerful space to have a creative performance there that was both
Mm.
respectful of the fact that we were surrounded by the dead, but
Mm.
also respectful of the history and the stories, without trying to pretend that and I thought that was really healthy, again, that we can do this kind of creative work to get people engaged and thinking about these questions. But it doesn't have to be just with, here's a display case, this is what we found, it was a
Mm.
great haul, there was a burial, that kind of descriptive, very approach to the past. Oh, that's my feelings on the matter anyway. I don't know how you
Mm.
think about it.
Well, I kind of agree with you, and I would say I am a historian, and I also done research in the archives,
Yeah.
making history as truthful as possible, and so on. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that,
No.
or this is so, but I two things. I think that for one thing, it's very easy to be sort of condemning users of the past. I mean, of course, there are sort of dark users of the past, far right-wing users, for example, or racist users of the past, and so on. And but that's not enough for me to say that we shouldn't do it at all. I think we should do examples of how you can use history in positive ways. So I'm very keen on promoting these positive examples of how history is used outside academia, to say that, okay, you have these dark things, and it's very easy to write an article about how the Vikings are used in far right groups and so on, and focus on that as a problem. And it is a problem, of course,
Yes,
but
of
that's not
course.
the only way that history is being used, or the Viking Age are being used. And if we only focus on the difficulties and the dark sort of sides of it, and lose track of all the things that happens around it, that's not problematic, but really, really engages people and do good stuff in society. I think it's a responsibility for me, at least, to give voice for all that uses that are not problematic. Do you see
Exactly.
what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, and then there's a lot of blurring together. It's neither one or the other. So, for example,
Mm.
when the Netflix film The Dig came up, representing the discovery in 1939 of the Sutton Hoo Mound 1 ship, I
Yeah.
both thought it was terrible and brilliant, because it was the first time ever we've seen a mid 20th century archaeological excavation. It's not real. It's not exact. It's
Mm.
a drama
Yeah.
based roughly around those historical events, and yet it's the first time anything like that has hit the screen. And it told of the importance of the finds, but it didn't fixate on the treasure. It was about the
Mm.
personalities. So I thought it was really positive, but it is still got a very English nationalist tally ho, we're facing
Yeah.
the Second World War, and
Mm.
look, we're finding our ancient roots. There
Yeah.
was a very overtly nationalistic narrative, and that doesn't
Mm.
mean it's either problematic or positive. It's both simultaneously. It's both, there's lots to, it's a moment we have to celebrate, but also identify some perhaps, simplifications, misrepresentations, and potential harmful aspects to that narrative. And that's it, you can't sort of isolate it off. It's about understanding, yes, and those positive connections that we need to make. This is a brilliant example. I hope there's more of it.
Yeah, and I need to say one more thing about the book, because this is the sort of basic storyline of the Grendel Horde book. But I felt that I needed more to sort of, for me to discuss reenactment than the Grendel Horde project. So what I did here, I contacted 3 reenactment groups spread across Europe. So I have one group in Sweden called Saligaster, the guests of the hall, and in Great Britain I have the Wolfodenas, and in Italy I have a group called La Fara, and they're all 3 groups are reenacting early Middle Ages, like 7th century Europe, from their different sort of local context. So the La Fara group in Italy, they're doing Langobards, for example, and I mean in the Wolfodenas are into Anglo-Saxons, and in them. Sweden we have this Wendel era group. They basically reenacts and reconstructs the past from the time when Beowulf was really into their culture.
Yes.
So I used the sort of Beowulf context and time era and focused on 3 groups doing reenactment in this sort of time frame, and I used them to discuss how they saw about things like authenticity, what authenticity is for them, how they discuss this, how they are developing their local sort of reenactment communities, and sort of what sort of ground rules they have towards reenactment and so on. And that was really fascinating for me too. Really, so I went to them, I interviewed them, and I did observations when they are doing the reenactments and so on. And what all 3 groups has in common is that they are very sort of hardcore reenactors. They really are into making archaeological reproductions. So they have, like this, the La Fara group, they only do specific graves. so they, all members in La Fara group, they choose one sort of Langobard grave, and they try to recreate the person in the grave.
Wow.
So they don't do anything else. And of course they have to, I mean, the grave goods are just a remnant, of course, these archaeological things, and they have to sort of try to visualize how the whole dress would be like and so on. And they use many different ways to sort of reconstruct these persons. But all members of the La Fara group, and the same is true for the Wolfodenas and the Salgas group too, they are all doing sort of archaeological findings and graves that they are trying to recreate, so to say. It was really interesting, and I would argue that all these 3 groups are very close to experimental archaeology. They are very close to sort of dividing line towards academic pursuits. Yes. And what struck me also was that many of them are academics or have become academics.
Yes, yeah.
They didn't start out, all of them didn't start out that way, but some of them they have become academics, for example. And just take one example, the La Fara group in northeastern Italy, they have been doing reenactment for many years. So it's quite small reenactment group, a small knit community. They don't take in new members a lot, so this is very close knit community. But they have been doing reenactment for a long time, and the storyline really is that when they started doing it, it was a lot of don't come near me from academics, from university or from the local museums and so on. But over time, they have really gained sort of acknowledgement from both university professors and curators at museums. So when I did my interviews with them a couple of years ago, they were really engaged in working close to the museum, for example,
Oh, wow.
in new exhibitions and so on. And Irene Barbina, who is one of the members there, she's really a textile academic.
Okay.
But during her years in La Fara and working with the museum, she's gone to being a sort of textile producer to working with textile as archaeological remnants. So she has become a textile expert when it comes to classifying archaeological finds at the museums. So a lot of people are going from outside academia to inside academia too. So people are making sort of personal travels here and gaining expertise and really become experts in their fields in their own right.
And that's the thing, is it's how do we better capture that expertise? And your book is a fantastic example of showing and celebrating, but also thinking through those projects. And I think that we need to be supporting this in different ways, with information sharing, with events, whether they want to go through to museums or not. But there's other ways in which we can, these projects can be facilitated, without us dominating it or stamping our singular view on it. I think there's really a lot of potential co-production and collaboration here, maybe. I don't know.
Absolutely. And you asked me before about upcoming projects. We actually have a very interesting book project coming near the end now.
Oh, I'm going to be mentioning this. Yes.
Yeah, we had a conference at Malmö University at Malmö for a couple of years ago, and the sort of basic idea there was to sort of mix academics, museum people, and reenactors in the same room. So we had a conference with all these three groups presenting and so on, and discussing past history, archaeology, reenactment, and so on. And from that, we tried to develop a book project, and the project is called Visiting the Past. So we thought of it like a handbook for how to work with reenactment from many different perspectives. So you have a lot of chapters here that sort of help people using reenactments, for example, at university courses. So you have an American professor writing about using reenactment in university. And so on, as a sort of pedagogical tool. And we have people writing about, okay, if you want to use food and food production as a part of your reenactment, what you need to think about there. We have people from museums writing about reenactment at museums and so on. So a lot of different groups. And the basic idea was to have different chapters on different aspects of reenactment. And in all these groups, you should have both academics and non-academics. And it's been so hard to do because it's easy to get people to talk, but to make people write together, it's kind of hard. Tough, and academics have their sort of perspectives, and they need to produce text, and there needs to be peer reviews and so on. And people that are into reenactment, they really want the text to be produced and published as quick as possible. So we have been doing this for like a couple of years now, and it's nearing the end. I'm very happy to say we have a publisher. So we are almost close to making it into a book now, and it will be a fabulous book, I think, because of the voice in the book is both academic and non-academic, all through.
Yes.
And every chapter has academics and non-academics writing together.
Lovely.
And it's been a fabulous sort of journey to do that as an academic. It's not easy. It'll be some rough traveling here and there, and we lost people on the way and so on. But in the end, I think it will be there's a groundbreaking book in that way, that we really have produced something new here.
I think that's really exciting, and people don't understand how difficult it is to bring together an edited collection, and especially when you're including people who are writing in a non-formal way or have different varying skill sets and experiences of academic writing. So that sounds like a really exciting project. So Stefan, we're coming to sort of a nice point to sort of wrap up at sort of approaching the hour. I don't know if you have, after all that detail, any reflections on the broader picture of where we're going with studying the late Iron Age, the past more broadly, the Vikings specifically in terms of our overlapping disciplines, because it seems to me that the Viking heritage and history in Europe book is one of very, very few that have tried to tackle head on this topic, and then this volume and forthcoming volumes going to take us into specific, more focused issues. Do you have any thoughts on, as a professor of history, on the big picture of how this all fits into our study of the past and its meaning today? Or maybe that's just too heavy a question to...
Yeah, it's a big question, but let's say it like this. I think if we don't acknowledge that people are using history, and if we don't acknowledge that they have sort of an expertise in using the history, there's a risk for us as academics to sort of downplay their importance or sort of write them out of history. I'm a social historian, and when I write social history as a real historian, going into archives, is about finding the people that are sort of lost for us. That's sort of what I've been done all my academic life. And I think it's the same is true here. What I really are looking for here is to find the uses of history that not has been seen before or acknowledged before. There's a lot of, when it comes to the sort of the subject of the use of history, there's a lot of research going into that. A lot of that has been how sort of like the Soviet Union used history as a sort of establishing their regime and so on.
Yeah,
that kind of big history
big
when it comes to
top
use.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm interested in the grassroots bottom-up perspective here. And I think if we don't see that and if we don't acknowledge it, we risk losing some very important perspective of how the history is being used. So my message to those historians and archaeologists that thinks that we should all only deal with real history, real archaeology, the real past as we find it in the archives or in the ground, we risk missing something important here. And histories and archaeology and all this stuff is going to be used anyway. And I think you agree with me here that we as academics has a responsibility here to help these people, to guide them, to lend our expertise to their endeavors, so to say. And so I feel a bit responsible here too. And when I say this, I'm very keen on stressing that I'm not doing this uncritically.
No.
Of course, as an academic, I have my critical perspectives, and I try to sort of discuss what I'm seeing here in a critical way. But I also feel I have a responsibility not only to highlight the problematic past and the problematic uses of the past, but also the positive, the engagement, the desire for the past, and really say that that's fine. And if people are being happy meeting the past, or I have this sort of idea of reenactment as something when the past and the present are colliding.
Yes.
And you have this crash, and when you talk to reenactors, almost all of them talk about sort of moments when they really can feel like that the past and the present are sort of connecting.
Yes.
And that's very beautiful, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my message.
Thank you, Stefan. And I think we should end it on that positive and insightful vision of the kind of work we are doing and the kind of work we can do. But I just want to thank you again, Stefan, for taking the time to talk about your work, the successful completed work, these exciting ongoing projects. And I just look forward to these ongoing projects reaching fruition in coming months and years. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. It's been a pleasure.
Follow Archaeodeath on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.